The famous Russian figure skater Alena Kostornaya will soon have a hip operation, her coach Elena Bayanova told about this. Surgical intervention for a rupture of the acetabular lip of the hip joint could have been performed by Kostornaya in the first half of July. But the FMBA clinic, which serves athletes of the Russian national teams, did not have the necessary consumables. Then it turned out that one of Alena's tests required a 10-day quarantine, and the date of the operation moved to the second half of August. Unfortunately, we do not have the option to choose another clinic. It is unlikely that they will find an opportunity for Alena to send her to be operated on in the same Germany. So the only thing left to do is wait. In such situations, people are not abandoned, there were no problems at all in the work, and, of course, it is already ours. Previously Kostornaya passed to Bayanova from Eteri Tutberidze. The entire coaching team is waiting for her on the ice. We will continue to work on an ongoing basis. She keeps herself positive, purposeful in her desires. I hope that this attitude will continue with her, said Bayanova. Kostornaya herself added that she would not return to the ice now until September, since it would take time to recover. This would not allow her to perform in test skates. In CSKA, I trained regularly, but I didn't skate, I didn't go out on the ice almost from the arrival from the training camp in Novogorsk. There was an old hip injury, which for a long time did not make itself felt, but at one moment it shot so much that I went for an examination. In general, tomorrow I go to the hospital for an operation, so I won't have time to recover by the test skates. I won't go on the ice until the second half of September. We have already staged the programs, they are very beautiful, interesting, they are all familiar stories. I have not heard such music from anyone yet. I hope that everything goes well, said the skater. Kostornaya's hip problems, apparently, are from the category of those that are not talked about. After all, every skater has some problems. Such is the fate of every professional athlete, alas. But for Alena, this is already some kind of series of injuries. The last time the skater went to the official start was already in November 2021 at the Grand Prix stage in France. By the way, Kostornaya then managed to get into the final of the series, but it was cancelled. In December, on the eve of the Russian Championship, it became known that Alena had broken her arm. As a result, she withdrew from the national championship and did not qualify for the Olympic Games. In the meantime, the rest of the figure skaters of the Tutberidze group performed at the European Championships, and in Beijing, a new misfortune fell on Alena, another fracture. Now of the other hand, the figure skater returned to training, skated without jumping. But on her YouTube channel, she made it clear to the fans that the season was over for her. Kostornaya did not compete in the final of the Russian Cup, she did not qualify for the World Championship, she missed the Channel 1 Cup. And here again, the new season does not start very well for her. Whether the skater will be able to fully return to the starts is a big question, and besides, there is no additional motivation as international starts. After the news of the planned operation of Kostornaya, the girl was supported by her colleagues from the world of figure skating. In particular, coach Yevgeny Plushenko spoke about a living example of how you can return to action after injuries. I wish Alena good health and a speedy recovery. Is it possible for her to return? You have a living example. I had 17 operations. It is important that the right specialist works with the athlete, so that there is proper recovery and rehabilitation. It is important to listen to doctors. Everything is possible, Plushenko said. Kostornaya also gave a little commentary on her exact diagnosis. The main diagnosis to be operated on is a rupture of the articular lip and something else with complex names. According to the doctors who examined me, it will be necessary to make decisions on concomitant injuries during the operation. Maybe everything will turn out to be easier than it seems now, or maybe, on the contrary, more difficult. The only thing I really don't want is to end up in the hospital on August 24th, my birthday. Therefore, if the operation does not work out before this day, I will ask you to operate on me on the 25th, the athlete said in an interview. Against the background of Kostornaya's injury, a flurry of criticism fell upon her former coach Eteri Tutberidze. This happened after the publication of an interview with Alena Kostornaya. It is worth noting that in Russia, the interview with Alena Kostornaya did not become such a big sensation. The Russian audience, apparently, is already accustomed to stories about how difficult it is for professional athletes. However, in the rest of the world, some fragments of this interview caused a shock. For example, Kostornaya, explaining how she decided to have an operation, spoke about her past experience when, as a minor, she took painkillers in such quantities that they ceased to work. After all, I skated with a fracture for a whole year when I was in juniors. The fibula of the left leg was broken. At first, They could not diagnose me for a long time. Accordingly, I trained as usual, and the coaches allowed to reduce the load only before the Junior World Championship, however, could no longer affect the general situation. By that time I could not walk. I jumped on one leg to the hall. The left leg is sheepskin coats and almost all cascades. I even tried to change these cascades, put Ritburgers instead of sheepskin coats. But the coaches explained that it was pointless to do this. That it is better to be patient once and roll back your usual program. That's when I felt what it's like when you swallow handfuls of painkillers, but the effect is zero. As a result, I still had to miss the competition. It was very disappointing, the athlete said. At the same time, Kostornaya did not directly say anything bad about working with Eteri Tutberidze, but her stories about working on the Krustelny ice, nevertheless, turned out to be expressive. I trained the triple axel, it didn't work out for a long time, then I still jumped it and I think, oh, how cool, now I'll do it for the second time in a row. I even managed to shout to Kvitolishvili, Maurice, look. And I land on my hand. It hurt, it was tinny, I even screamed. My hand swells in front of my eyes, I can't move my fingers, I take off my glove, tears flow. We went to the emergency room, where it turned out that the fracture. The coaches gave me 3 days of rest. On Monday I came out, a cast from the fingertips to the elbow does not bend. Well, when the cast was removed after 3 weeks and I started jumping triples, I did Salchow, Ritburger in training, then I went to flip. And, despite the fact that she was in a small weight and did not lose her physical shape, she fell in the same way as the first time, only on her left hand. My fingers immediately began to go numb, but I thought that I would have time to go to this flip again. Still, she did it before going back to the emergency room. I realized that the hand was broken when I could not hold the dog with this hand. On that day, the coaches were not at the rink, and when I came to the next training session after the day off, you should have seen how they looked at me. Like, how do you do that? It was the end of February, Eteri Georgievna's birthday was approaching, and somehow she detained me at the skating rink and said that it would probably be better for us to part. An interview with Kostornaya in Russian was published on August 13th. 2 days later, the world-famous resource FS Gossips published a translation of this interview into English. And a violent reaction followed very soon. As usual, social media users were the first to protest. Dozens of comments appeared in them, in which Eteri Tutberidze was accused of cruelty. Kostornaya also spoke about the reasons for the difficult relationship with Daniil Gleikhengauz, the choreographer in the group of Eteri Tutberidze. Yes, there was no conflict, I don't know why they think so. It's just that, while training with Eteri Georgievna, I could occasionally mess up, it happens to everyone. After the skates, she usually expressed her opinion, but for the most part one kept my opinion to myself. But when, for some reason, Tutberidze was not at the rink, Daniil Markovich began to distribute marks, and for some reason I was very offended to hear all this from him. On this basis, we periodically clashed, said Kostornaya.